Hi Year 10. The purpose of this video is to show you how to get into level 5 for your analysis. Now to get level 4 for this task, you need to analyse thoroughly. You need to go through the text in a thorough way, which means to do it in a detailed way. To get into level 5 means you have to really thoughtfully analyse and explain the effect of a piece of language. The key word here is perception. Have you shown enough perception? Have you really thought deeply about what exactly that word does? And what I'm going to show you today is not just how to come up with one way, one effect for that word, or I'm going to show you how you can look at a second viewpoint. And hey, what's more perceptive and thoughtful than not just thinking of one thing, one effect that a word has, but being able to think of two. If you're able to do that maybe 3, 4, 5 times across your essay, look at two alternative ways that a single word could be interpreted, that's going to get you into the top level of the mark scheme. Now here's my first paragraph here. As you can see, I've focused on a specific quotation from Out, snarled and rattled. I've explained the effect of that word. It personifies the buzzsaw, which is the effect. It makes it feel alive. However, that's not enough. In order to get into the top level, I need to not just comment on what the effect is, but what is the impact on me as a reader? What am I realising? What am I understanding as a result of making the buzzsaw feel alive? Well, I ask myself, well, what does it do to me? What does it make me understand? It makes me understand how potentially dangerous the blade is, and it makes it sound vicious and ready to attack. Now that is where I'm showing a bit more perception. If I stopped here, I might only get level 4. Now, the fact I've gone this extra step further and I've used this phrase helps us to understand, and I've come up with another idea here, that means I'm not just being thorough and going through every word or going through lots of evidence. I'm now showing perception. Now, I don't just want to stop there. I want to show even more perception, and we can see this here. Now, as ever, I want you to use a connective to link to another point. And here I focused on a second technique. The first technique was personification there. The second technique is repetition here. What does that do? The repetition of the phrase makes the sound of the saw seem continuous. Snarled and rattled, snarled and rattled. And so what's the point of that? What's the impact of that? It helps the reader to imagine how loud it must have sounded, particularly against the quiet landscape. And that arguably makes it even more vicious. So again, that's the effect. What does it do? What does it make me initially think of? What does that suggest? Well, it suggests it's continuous. But what's the impact of that? Well, it makes it feel to me like the saw is very loud and it's moving almost. The fact it's rattling, it has so much power behind it. It doesn't stay still, but it rattles, it's shaking. My second paragraph, and this is on Kate Chopin's story, The Story of an Hour. Again, imagine I've already got a topic sentence about how the marriage has been an unhappy one, for example, and then I've gone into my evidence. The fact she was pressed down by physical exhaustion is interesting. And then I've gone into my specific word analysis, as the verb pressed suggests that she is almost being pushed down by a more powerful force. That's the effect. I've used an analytical phrase and I've explained the effect of that word pressed. It suggests to me that she's being pushed down by something. So what's the point of that? What does that make me understand about her? What's the impact? Which makes us understand just how fatigued she is. It makes me understand how tired she is. And now what I've tried to do is go a bit further. What I've tried to do is include a second interpretation. I'm just going off the edges there. A second interpretation. So another way, another thing for how that word could be interpreted. And do you see how I'm not quite sure I've got this point right, but I'm trying to be thoughtful. So I've used the word could. That tells the examiner I'm not quite sure, but it's my own idea, and I'm taking a bit of a risk here. I'm going for a more perceptive idea. This could also reflect how her unhappy marriage has exhausted her, and she has felt pushed down and oppressed by the man she has been married to. Now, I'm sure you all agree that's a much better point than the one I had up here. So that second interpretation, that second bit of impact, has allowed me to show the examiner much more perception. So I really want you to do this in your writing, and don't forget, I'm the one initially marking it. So if I'm telling you to do something and it will get you a good mark, do it. You'll get more marks. I'm on your side, folks. I'm trying to give you the best advice possible. And finally, one more point, sorry. So if you stopped your paragraph here, for example, if you stopped your analysis here, then you'll only ever get level 4. You can only ever be thorough if you went through lots of quotations. However, if you included this extra bit, then that's when you're starting to show perception. That's when you're getting into level 5 and you're getting into the 20 marks plus out of 24. Now, this is another example. This is for the poem Disabled. So I've tried to give you a bit of a range. Hopefully I've given you an example of at least one text that you've studied, although you can't copy this into your own work, but you can use similar quotations and give your own viewpoints on what they are. Again, I've got another topic sentence about how the soldier is presented, and then I've zoomed in on this phrase from the first stanza, waiting for dark. And I've used the word could to show that I'm trying to be perceptive. What could it do? It could reflect how the young man has nothing else to do but passively wait for the end of the day. I'll use my effect colour so we don't get confused. That's the effect. That's what it suggests to me. He's waiting for dark because he's got nothing else to do. So what does that make me realise about him? What does that make me understand about his life now? It makes me understand how empty his life is now. You can see how that's a slightly more perceptive idea than the clause before it. So I've taken that next level of perception, and all I did was ask myself, so what does that make me understand? Now, this is where you get to the very top of the mark scheme. However, an alternative interpretation of dark could be, so again, I'm using that word could. Here, I'm making it very obvious to the examiner, look at me, I've thought of another way that word can be interpreted. This is kind of what I did here. This could also reflect, but I've made it even more obvious for the marker. And then if I was marking this piece of work in the comments on the side, I would put looking at second interpretation, very thoughtful, which will then make the examiner agree with me, giving this piece of work a level 5 mark. It could be suggesting that the young man is now waiting for death. So my second interpretation is that he's not just waiting for the night time, but he's waiting for death. Now that's a second interpretation. And then what does that make me do? What does that make me realise about his life? Well, if he's waiting for death, that makes me realise that he's got nothing to live for. Any opportunities or hopes he once had for his life have been taken away from him, and therefore all he wants is death. Now, if you wrote like that, you would get level 5. What you need is obviously your topic sentence up here, quotation, analysis, second interpretation for that word, then you'll link to a second quotation and then analyse that, end the paragraph. So that's just a how-to guide for how to improve your analytical detail to be more perceptive, and it's all about these two things. It's all about the effect and then all about the impact, and then don't forget to use those helpful phrases to help you analyse both the effect and the impact.